getting better at timing when I'm supposed to come in. It's impressive after what
9.5 years.
After 9.5 years, that's right. Finally got it down. I do like in this song is that in the first chorus when they hit the really high notes, it sounded like it hurt them as much as it hurt me, and I genuinely appreciate that authenticity in musician. It's hard to find nowadays.
Authentic brokenness is one of our favorite things.
It's good to be vulnerable amongst friends.
And I've found that when we have distinguished academics on, they love to sit through the intro music. It's just their thing.
Facial expressions usually indicate how the show's going to go.
I can't bear to watch anymore. I turn my head to the side so I don't have to. I keep the cringe local, personal. So, is all well with you, Resby?
All is well. We're hurtling towards the holidays, as I believe we always are this time of year. Multiple conversations with the kids about how October seemed like just a breeze that was here and gone, and now I guess can we officially say we're in late November? We're in the final third of November, which is pretty crazy. But all in all, it's been good. It was your quintessential 75-degree November day in the mountains, just like you would expect after this time last week when it was 25 at night. So cool little 50-degree swing inside of about 10 days.
Yes, we've had that. I know Philip has, because he doesn't live far from me, and Bill Redinger. Is it ready? Bill, unmute there. How do you pronounce your last name? I don't want to get it wrong.
Yeah, it's a hard G, Redinger.
Redinger, yeah. Okay. I like that. That's easy. And we also have Philip Bunn with us tonight, and you're down in Covenant College.
Yes. Yeah, Bunn's a little bit easier to pronounce, I think.
Yes. So are you from the coffee maker magnate family?
I sure wish I was. I might not be working an academic job if I was.
Oh, no, you do it. You do it because you
yeah, do it for fun. Yeah, that's true.
So, Resby, anything else before we get started? I sort of jumped in there.
No, I always, whenever we have guests on, I always like to kind of scroll through Twitter accounts first, and just kind of read, get a vibe of the room.
Let's be honest. What you're checking our guests out to see if they're wrestling fans like you are.
An occasional reference goes a long way. Flattery will get you far on this show. However, what I did find, and I think this will probably be we'll call it the hallmark difference between myself and our guests, is two tweets, one from me and one from Bill. Bill said, "Thinking of becoming an olive oil snob," approximately 3 hours ago. About a week and a half ago, I tweeted, "I'm thinking about spending even more money on energy drinks." So I think those two sentences alone sum up exactly what we're looking at show-wise. So we're going to cross the streams.
I appreciate that. Really, I'm just thinking about moving a little bit away from fast food drive-thrus and towards some healthy fats that taste pretty amazing. That's where that came from. I want to assure you that I was watching very intently at WrestleMania circa 1988 or so.
Great to hear that.
Yeah. I haven't really kept up with it, since I've.
No, it's because you grew up like a normal human.
I mean, I wasn't going. I've started that sentence and didn't want to finish it, so thank you for doing that.
Yeah. I watched wrestling in the 70s. Yeah. I think when I was old enough to have a driver's license, I was already done with wrestling, but I don't have the special mental and moral makeup to enjoy it the way Resby does.
Well, like all the great sports of our time, Saudi Arabia is getting its hands involved.
The sheikh or the sheik, yes. So let's properly introduce our guests now that we've humiliated them. Let's go. We'll go. Bill, you look older, and I think you are. Bill Redinger, You teach at, is it Regent University?
That's right, Regent University in Virginia Beach. Some some of the older folks may be familiar with CBN University, founded in the 70s. If you're south of the Mason-Dixon line, and so
Oh, okay.
CBN at some point, I don't know, maybe the 90s, it turned into Regent University. So it started that way, and
But they
and
didn't
so
have the water. They weren't the one with the water slide, though. That was
no, to my knowledge, we have not had water slide. I'm not
that's
sure what
good.
you're referring to there.
No, there's a famous picture of Jerry Falwell going down a water
Yes.
slide when they bought the PTL or something. I don't know.
Yeah, Regent's campus has not been accused of being an amusement park, as have some of our other fellow Virginian campuses. But yeah, I've been here for 15 years. I teach political theory, history of political ideas, and a particular interest in American political thought, with some interest in the Reformed faith and politics.
Do you attend a Reformed church out there?
Yes, we are members of a PCA, and my wife and I, we have been in the PCA or OPC since about 2004.
I thought I detected a little tick there, and I guess that's the OPC time that you put in. Coming through. No, everyone knows that's a joke. This is OPC Philic podcast. All right, so Bill, we like to have guys like you on, Bill, because we have a hard time finding people as smart as we are, just to be frank. So we like to bring the educated crowd on sometimes, rather than these phony seminary degrees that all of our guests seem to have. So Philip, you're younger, but you're a scholar in the same field, and I think you were talking about doing postdoc work, which suggests to me that you have a doctorate. So you'll have to explain that to us non-academics.
Yeah, so I teach at Covenant College, PhDs in political theory, and so I also teach history of political thought classes, American politics classes. I did grad school in Wisconsin, the frozen north, and then was very fortunate to end up back in the south, both for a postdoc shortly at Clemson, and then now pretty close to where I grew up in East Tennessee.
So did you ever run into Dabo on the sidewalk?
I didn't. I had a couple players in my classes a couple times, but no, I mostly avoided the sports crowd while I was at Clemson. That was a little bit outside my wheelhouse. So
there's so much BCA connection to Clemson that when I see them taking a drubbing on Saturday, I think, boy, there's going to be some bad sermons tomorrow at a lot of churches across the BCA.
Yeah, a lot of disappointed fans, I'm sure.
Yeah. So, and then, of course, to remind everyone, Covenant College is the RPCES institution that came into the PCA with joining and receiving in the 80s, and it is our denominational college, and it's within the bounds of the presbytery that I'm part of. So it's a small world. Always has been, apparently. All right, so I had a kind of an open, you guys are not radicals, but you mentioned political things online, and I'm sure you talk with your colleagues and you're around young people. So we thought it'd be good to talk to at this time in the history of the country, which is pretty wacky. But the first question that occurred to me is we talk about we're in the era of Trump and Nick Fuentes and Mamdani and all kinds of craziness. But 10 years from now, what do you think you guys will be telling your students about 2025? So, Philip, you've got an agile young mind at this late hour. You can come up with something.
Yeah, I would say, I think we're going through a period where a lot of old norms are being shaken off, and we kind of have yet to see what politics will look like in a truly kind of post-Trump era. So assuming he doesn't end up running for a third term through whatever trickery people have suggested to him, we're coming up on just a few years left of So I started grad school in 2017, so I've never not been doing sort of professional political science during the Trump era. So it's hard for me to even know sort of what that will look like. I think we're in for just probably a sort of battle for the legacy.
Did we lose some audio?
Yeah, I've lost audio for you, Philip. I don't know.
Hold on a second. Oh, am I back?
There you
Can
are.
you hear me now?
There we
Yeah,
go.
I don't know what happened with that. I'm sorry. I'm plugged into the wall, so hopefully it shouldn't be my internet, but we'll see. I don't know.
So
where
you were
lost.
saying you've never known a non-Trump time as a professional political academic person.
Yeah, so I guess I think what we have to look forward to, here at the end of the second Trump term here in a few years is going to be probably a battle for the legacy of what that looks like going forward. And one way or another, whoever comes out on top in that, and whatever the policies look like then and the policy issues look like, it's, we've had a period, I'd say, of a lot of norm breaking or norm challenging. And so it's hard for me to even say what that could look like, because who knows, if we have a sort of what seems normal now for politics, if we have let's say a Democratic president that succeeds Trump, who knows what their party's going to do with the things that he's done. So it's hard for me to say. I don't prognosticate well. I tell people, if I ever make a prediction, you should bet against it if you're a betting person, which you shouldn't be, but that's fine.
So you said whoever comes out on top. It's like if you win, did you win anything though?
Right. Well, yeah, and I mean, also just whoever comes out on top in the battle for whatever Trump's legacy is, so it remains to be seen over the next few years if Vance stays in his good graces, whoever comes next that kind of takes up the torch, what that'll look like. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a strange time. So my first political I was born in '65, so my first political memories are is Nixon. That's
Peace be upon him.
Yeah, and I remember we had a straw poll in the fourth grade, and some kid he said he referred to McGovern as McGovernor. I just remember that, and I knew we weren't voting for him. So yeah, I go back a little bit. So Bill, what do you think you'll be telling your students 10 years from now about 2025, about what happened around this time?
Well, I guess first, I sort of want to answer a different question. That's a hard one. I mean, I guess first, I'd repeat what Philip said, that politics is not something that you predict, and if you attempt to, usually you look foolish. But I mean, one thing that I think is necessary to point out is the way in which people think about politics who are your typical 18, 19-year-old adult coming into college is significantly different for a variety of reasons than when I started teaching at the college level. But I think the most important one is that I think you alluded to this already, Philip, but so many norms have changed. And so, people will watch I might show a clip from a debate, I don't know, Reagan Mondale or something, or even Bush Gore 2000. And it seems like a foreign country, particularly to students who have no memory of people talking as if they were taking this seriously, if I could put it that way. And one of the things that some of the more traditionalist conservatives were concerned about in 2016 during the Republican nomination process is that, once you sufficiently disrupt norms, it's really difficult to know how to get them back. And so, whether we will see some sort of a return to, a greater decorum, I guess a greater ability to deliberate, I would suggest that would probably depend upon some sort of release valve for the passions which exist in the country right now. I don't know what that looks like, but it is probably going to be at least somewhat painful. So I guess that's the first thing I would say. And but the second thing is, particularly with the changes that have happened in my experience so far, it's really maybe obvious at some point to everyone, but I distinctly remember maybe around 2020 or so, just really being gripped by the idea that people really are very quick to assume that the way things are or the way things they will always be. And so, whatever will be in the American landscape in 10 years, seems pretty likely there will be some shifts that just can't be predicted. But people who are, I guess, fearful that about this or that thing at the current moment, it's probably not something that is that great um, in its staying power. But
Well, we've had dueling and caning. We've had caning on the
well,
floor of the House of the Senate, and we've had legislators shooting each other on the green. Um, so it's not like we're in a unprecedentedly coarse time. But getting you don't necessarily want to go back to that.
Yeah. I like to remind students sometimes that I think you're exactly right, that like we do sometimes think like, oh, things are getting worse than they ever have been. I like to remind them that, at least for the past 20 years, maybe 40 years, we've lived in a sort of unprecedented period of low amounts of political violence, and things like you're describing, were the norm for a long time. If we think the things politicians are saying in the media now are scandalous, go back to the sort of, early Republic era and look at, everything from the stuff that is portrayed in the Hamilton musical about the Reynolds affair, and then all the things that Jefferson was saying about Adams and his wife. But things have been bad. Yeah. So I think that's a fair bit of historical perspective to give students. But also, yeah, I've had the exact experience, Bill, where like I show a debate from 20 years ago, or even in some cases, just like the 2016 primary debates, and people are like, oh, well, one, the people here are sharper 10 years ago than they are now, but also even that feels almost like a foreign world to them compared to what we're experiencing. So.
It's always fun to remember that our current president skipped one of the debates in that cycle as well. I mean, just flat out didn't show up.
So you're saying it could have been worse?
Things could always be worse.
So let me ask you guys. You know a little history. It seems like that we have government by meme, especially since the last election. It's like, I don't know, maybe 8-9 years ago on Twitter, I thought GIFs were stupid, and the little, the simple memes with the sans serif letters and the impact font, labeling things because you're not smart enough to figure it out. And I thought, I'm just not going to do that. And I'm not even going to use GIFs. Well, of course, I use GIFs now. I make memes. I do all this stuff. But what in history is like this, the meme wars that we have? Or it's almost like communicating with cave drawings. I mean, that. But I know that there were, well, you think about the pamphlets from the founding era. There was some literature there. But I'm sure there were scurrilous pamphlets, and there were political caricatures, and we forget.
Brad, you're frozen. I don't know if you can hear.
His internet is acting very much. Your internet's acting like mine typically does.
All right. Well, I'm back. So what I said was, newspapers there was no pretense of being objective in the 1700s and the 1800s, even in the early 1900s with Hearst and all those guys. And they had political cartoons that were like memes. But is this unprecedented? I mean, are we? Is it a sign of regression that we communicate in little tiny images with a few words?
Philip, what do you think?
You're young.
Sign of regression. I mean, I would say yes in some ways, right? Because if I don't even know how many students I have are still reading things like Common Sense in high school, right? But if you go read Paine's Common Sense, and not that I have a high opinion of Thomas Paine, but just in terms of style and the background he expected his audience to have, and then you realize, like, by scale, the number of these that were printed and sold and read, like, it's the equivalent of a book being printed tomorrow and being read by a third of Americans in a couple of weeks. I mean, I'm exaggerating slightly, but it's like the idea that an average semi-educated person could pick up Common Sense today and not really struggle with it is like that's kind of inconceivable. And so in terms of degradation, yeah, I'd say like things like literacy, historical knowledge, political knowledge, all those might be declining in some ways that we might be concerned about. But I mean, yeah, you mentioned political cartoons. There's those are fun to pull up, right? There's one from the era where Burke wrote his Reflections on the Revolution that the caption is something like smelling out a rat of the atheistic revolutionist, and it has Burke like emerging from the clouds with a big nose looking at I guess Priestley that he's writing against, and they're funny and they're meme like, but even those are like more intelligent than the stuff that we're dealing with now. So I mean, I try not to be like an old crank and like shaking my fist at things, but it certainly is kind of like a wake up call to go read things that were the equivalent of like complicated letters to the editor back in the founding era, and then read our political discourse today. It certainly is kind of discouraging at times, I would say.
Well, it's like, what do you think de Tocqueville would have thought of 6-7? Those are the really
Right,
important
right.
questions which we're here
Exactly.
to answer today.
I've yet to see someone write an essay on that, so that there's an open market for it.
All I ask is for a citation.
So, Philip, I suggest that you avoid the rush and all the trouble of resisting. Just become an old crank sooner rather than later. It works fine. Bill, you probably recommend that, right?
Well, hopefully not too much of a crank, but the basic idea, of course, if you have a major technological change in society, is that it's usually going to be accompanied by social upheaval. So I recall it wasn't too long ago you had T. David Gordon on, and he's someone interested in media ecology, and the you think about some of the major changes in communications technology within American history. One of the big ones is the telegraph, and a great the authoritative book on this is What Hath God Wrought by Daniel Walker Howe. Talking about all of the kind of social and political fallout of being able to send a message so rapidly that was unheard of for all of human history up to this point, and I think it's pretty clear that there has to be significant changes. I mean but because of the medium itself, I think that there's it's somewhat misleading just to chalk it up to people being dumb now or something. People adapt to the media shapes them, this kind of thing. The
Yeah.
medium. So,
Well, some people would ask, does it make us dumb that we don't have to apply ourselves to these things? But yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's something particular about communicating with and reading the written word, which is demanding of people. And of course, there's the argument that your memory is harmed by living in a textual society. But there is something particularly problematic, I think, just about a visual dominant kind of media environment. It's just not propositional by its nature. You can't produce propositional claims that can be measured with words and thoughts in the same way. And so it's the old problem of truth, goodness, and beauty. I mean, beauty is supposed to be supporting these other two, but it of course it's aesthetics of all things. So I have the ability to deceive. And so you communicate too much in memes, you end up getting as much falsehood as anything, I think.
Yeah, I think the reform
It's a scathing indictment of me that just happened, right?
Well, and myself, really. But
I think
I could delete my camera roll, I would.
Yeah, you don't know how though. You and Spin. The reform should have been armed against the downside of visuals, because we take the Second Commandment seriously, and we know that the Second Commandment doesn't ban all images of all kinds. but I think the principle of warning about images is something we should have taken to heart, even more generally, because there's a power there. I mean, I used to be a newspaper and wire service photographer in the film days, and I remember, I remember, I could tell you cases of where images were badly misused. I remember there was an American photographer who just made a career out of Winnie Mandela, Nelson Mandela's wife, and he basically deified her with pictures. And then it turned out that she's ordering young men to put I forget what they call them, the necklaces where you put a tire around a guy's head and you fill it with gasoline. That was a popular political retribution tool in Soweto and Johannesburg. She was not a good person, but she was deified by the camera. The camera loved her, and that happens in 1,000 ways. So images are powerful, and they don't always tell the truth. I hate to break that to anyone, but that's a fact. So we're talking about media here, but really, I think what we're concerned with, and we want to jump to, it's not so much whether we're talking about memes or images or AI images, maybe, or tweets or even articles, but the content of them. And I think what we've seen, we talk about the coarsening of political debate. We've seen a coarsening. This is certainly a regression back to the point where anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish tropes, and of course, some people say, "Well, you can't define anti-Semitism." This is really just a political issue with Israel, American-U.S. Israeli-U.S. relations. Obviously, it's a little more than that, and it's a silly argument to say, "Oh, this is just political." There's something deeper and darker going on. If you'd have told me in 1980 that we would be doing anti-Semitism again, and that certain racial tropes and slurs would be considered funny and entertaining, I would not have believed that. I don't think I would have been very surprised. That was a fringe thing then, but no more. So what really got us thinking? Of course, you guys deal with college students, younger people. There was an article, and think of him what you will, by Rod Dreher last week, I believe it was, and think what you will of J.D. Vance. I'm no big fan, or Viktor Orban. I happen to know a missionary who's in Hungary, and he would tell you that everything you read and hear about Viktor Orban is not, maybe shouldn't be quite as so glowing as it's represented. But the main takeaway from this Rod Dreher Substack, what I saw and heard in Washington, was that a certain kind of transgressive, anti-Semitic, ethos is a thing among young conservatives in D.C. So I gather both of you guys read this, and before we talk about it, just what were your general impressions? Of course, people that haven't heard of Rod Dreher, I think he was briefly an evangelical, and he was Roman Catholic. He was a big part of uncovering some of the clergy abuse, sexual abuse of minors. Now he's Eastern Orthodox, and I think he lives in Hungary. He lives in Budapest. So he's a strange one, but he can be entertaining. And if you're watching, he's on the right there, photobombing these rich and famous people, looking a little creepy. That's what Rod does.
It almost looks like the Seinfeld picture where Costanza's in the background. Like it has a similar type of vibe of. It's not photoshopped, but maybe it is.
It has a vibe. It may have aura. I hear a lot about aura recently. So, but what did you guys make of this article? Just briefly before we kind of talk about some of the observations and contentions that are made within it.
Well, I would say that I thought he raises an important concern, and it is somewhat similar to some of the things that I have noticed and seen among either college students or other folks. My impression is that some of his advice is very good, while at the same time, maybe there are certain respects in which he's, um, is thinking about the vice president in uh, somewhat naive terms. Some people might think, but uh, in spite of the fact that I think he identifies something real, he is at times given to I don't want to say sensational, but very alarmed excess, I think. And so I wonder if that doesn't come through here. Early on in the essay says that according to his insider contacts, between 30 and 40% of Zoomers who work in Republican staffs in Washington are fans of Nick Fuentes. And not being in Washington, I don't know what
Yeah,
to say about that.
it's a shocking
it seems
claim.
like a big number.
Yeah,
Seems like a big number.
it's a shocking claim. But if the number's half that, it's still a big deal, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So, Philip, remind us what a Zoomer is. What's that age group?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the Gen Z age group. So, I mean, I'm at the tail end of the millennials. I think I'm as old as a millennial can technically be and still be a millennial. So it's the people who are younger than me who really grew up on social media in a way
which
that
is
I
really
didn't.
always the worst. That's the worst group. The people younger than you.
Just
they're
slightly
always,
younger than me.
They're
Yeah,
the worst.
Yeah. They're the
Yes.
troublemakers. They're the problem ones. I mean, I think by now we're getting into, especially the freshmen in college, we're getting into the Gen Alpha range. So we're not, we might be complaining about the wrong people at some point.
So,
but, yeah.
I always like to measure the generations out by presidential administrations. Like, I think you can make a good case. The late Xers, early millennials are, probably the first half to the early part of the second Reagan term, and then you get into the Clinton presidencies, and now we're at the point where somebody, born on election night 2000 is either with a bachelor's degree or soon to have one, which is kind of wild. So I always feel like Z, or maybe a little after, I think you're looking into, if I say the phrase like hanging chads, do you have any idea what I'm talking about? If the answer is no, that pretty much tells me a lot. And not as an insult, just as what was your context around political science, and that was, I think, a pretty big defining factor.
No, I found this article really interesting. I have complicated feelings about Rod. I've followed him for a long time. I really enjoyed the Benedict option when it came out. I read it early and ended up. I met Rod briefly at a Front Porch Republic conference shortly after the book came out, and I think it was unfairly maligned in some ways. But I think you're right. Like the description that you gave of him sometimes being a bit. I don't want to say reactionary because that has like political implications. I don't mean, but like overreacting to certain things, I think comes out in that book and in reporting subsequent to that. And so I think the like kind of apparent exaggeration is here. But the thing that was like, I guess, really ironic to me about the article is that, the kind of person that he's describing, the kind of young person who's like concerned about Jewish influence and blah, blah, blah. There's some overlap there with the criticisms you were raising about like Viktor Orban, right? So, I mean, Orban through most of his tenure, I mean, I think he was elected first in like 2010 to the position he's in and then out for a brief time back in. But in his time, he has complained a lot about George Soros and the Open Society Foundation. And while I think it would maybe be unfair to like call Orban himself like openly anti-Semitic, he certainly like played into some tropes associated with that group. And so it's just interesting to see Rod like concerned about it on the American front, less concerned about it with Orban, because the article immediately after this on his Substack is him defending Orban in many ways. And I mean, he's paid by a government institute there. And so he's obviously very enmeshed with what's going on. I don't know, that felt kind of ironic, but I did appreciate, I think, the sort of him saying, like, yeah, when I had a chance to sit down with Vice President Vance, what I wanted to talk to him about was, like, the things that I saw and have heard from young people and that he should be concerned about this. Like, don't let your movement, whatever it is, be captured by these guys. I think that's a good sentiment. I share it. And so hopefully he got through to Vance, at least as far as that goes.
Well, that's hard for a politician because they want everybody to love them. And then there are these unicorn magical demographics that they especially want, and that includes young people. Bill, what were your first impressions of this piece? Which, again, it's a good conversation starter because it suggests there's a lot of this when we say Nick Fuentes, we mean people that who trade in racial slurs and tropes and have a very low opinion of the Jewish race.
Sure. Well, I guess a few thoughts to add to what I've already said about it. I guess maybe just continuing off of what Philip has said. The situation with Orban is, I think, a confusing one, and it might be worth just pausing for a moment just to observe that Orban, as I understand it, is, I guess he might be labeled Hungarian Reformed, but married to a Catholic lady or something. And there's some questions about whether he's serious about any of this. But one of the things which came to my attention a few years ago, I'm interested in this claim. Hungary is a Christian civilization; it's resisting all of these things which are going on here, which are highly alarming. And so you get to looking into this a little bit more, and one of the things that happens around the time when COVID is I guess it would be late 2020, COVID is going on, and he delivers this speech. I can't remember the name of the speech right off the top of my head, but he's really bringing it to Western Europe, and very plausible criticisms are being raised about some cultural and political problems, and at times the speech reminds me of Marcuse and the way in which he argues about the rule of law being basically a scam. It's something the bourgeois is pulling over your eyes, or this kind of thing. And you get to looking into Orban's background. I mean, this is an individual who wrote his university thesis on Gramsci, and he thinks, I think, about politics very much through this power lens,
Yeah,
clearly with different policy preferences.
let me jump in for people that don't know.
Yeah.
Gramsci and Marcuse, they're really the intellectual foundation of what we call the New Left or neo-Marxism, and the sort of leftism you see in public universities and that sort of thing. That's really, that it doesn't come straight from Marx. It comes through the Frankfurt School and Marcuse and Gramsci, who was an Italian revolutionary. So just to let people know.
Yeah, so I don't want to go too far, I guess, into that, since you're particularly concerned here about this question of what the Dreyer has to say here about suspicion of Israel, suspicion of the Jewish people among the young. But I guess I just wanted to suggest I have some questions about Mr. Dreyer's understanding of some of these other actors that he's referring to here. But the there are certain things that I would nitpick with, I guess, but I would suggest that anecdotally, this is something which I've run into quite a bit among young right wing conservative young men, and it's there's a lot that we could say about this. The right at the end of the essay, or near the end of the essay, he has this very long list of summary points. So he appears to be just throwing this together and then realizing that it gets going for a while. And so he wants to wrap it together with a bullet point list, which I appreciated. And Mr. Dreyer says under point 13 that some parents of radical children comforted themselves, he says, with the thought that their adult kids would grow out of their revolutionary fervor. Others may have hated what their kids believed, but they didn't want to risk alienating them, so they stayed quiet. And I think that's a particularly important piece of advice. I mean, I don't think this is the kind of thing where, if you play it soft, that people would even respect that, for starters, if they're more attracted to anti-Semitic kind of ideas. And I mean, undoubtedly, folks who might be listening who hear me even say that, or they might say, well, I'm no anti-Semite, I'm just asking questions or something, this kind of thing. But it's something which, in my experience, this is maybe it's related to the earlier discussion of memes. You get the impression at times that this is not these are not opinions that people arrive at through some sort of careful deliberation of rational evidence. That there's a real grievance about something that is beyond reason, and so I don't think that it's something we should be gentle about.
Yeah, these guys were something else or nothing at all 3 to 5 years ago. That's what I've seen with a lot of people started landing in the reformed online world, and all of a sudden they knew everything when they had been in a megachurch 2 years before, or nowhere,
Hmm.
or so I think you're right. People don't arrive at these convictions by doing the reading. To quote some of our friends on the New Christian Right, it's I think they find some people who say they've done the reading and they like those people. They like the noises they're making or the images that they're spinning out, and they sign up and they're on board.
I wonder if there's not some analogy to like pandemic expertise that we saw.
We had it. We were good at everything.
We were very right about so many things, but even listening to and it's a great listen, and the kind of the sound of my late nights driving in Southern California. But Adam Carolla on Rogan this last week talking about all the talking heads, how all of a sudden everybody was an expert on all of the things COVID, and they knew exactly what wouldn't work. And if you try this, or you believed thing B when thing A was the expertise model, then you were to be completely disregarded. And overnight, this wall of expertise came up, and it seems like this might be the other side of the same coin as that, and now we're kind of having to deal with it.
Yeah, something that Rod says early on in the piece I think is relevant, where he says like can you blame some of these kids, where it's like what they've gone through is like, okay, I've experienced like this kind of, call it elite or expert actor lying in a way, or that I at least feel lied in this way, in this domain, and COVID seems to activate at least some of that. On the like doing the reading thing too, I think one of the marketing benefits that you get if you're on the sort of edgy side of some of these issues is that you get to sort of play off the human instinct that I think a lot of people sometimes associate with like a temptation towards, call it like Gnosticism, like, ooh, here's this secret knowledge that's been hidden from me, and now I'm getting a peek behind the curtain, and I can kind of access something that was closed off to me. And I, not that I'm sympathetic to the way a lot of these guys think, but I am in some way sympathetic in the sense that I do think we went through a period where what our friends on the more new right side call the quote unquote post-war consensus was so loud that it was almost like we weren't actually educating people about these things, about the history, about why these things were bad. We weren't talking about like what is fascism and why is it bad. It was just like, oh, well, it's a buzzword and it's bad, of course. And so I think sometimes that leads to this like feeling of like, now I'm getting this secret knowledge that, ooh, they never told me why it was bad, and it's because, oh, maybe it's not actually that bad. I think that's some of the train that happens, but I think y'all are right too to say like most of the time this is not like a logic process. This is not premise to conclusion. This is a feeling. Like I felt bad because I felt like people lied to me, and now I'm seeking for answers or somebody else that can make me feel better where those people made me feel bad. So
yeah, I think another problem I had with the article was that Rod was sympathetic to some of these young people with extreme views, and he basically said it's so, the economy's so bad, it's so hard to buy a house, student debt is such a problem that I don't really blame them at some level. I was relating that argument to my wife, and she quickly reminded me that it wasn't so easy 40 years ago either. There's nothing new under the sun, and it's never been easy. Now, housing prices are uniquely high. I was looking at some housing. I was thinking about what I paid, or for 2 or 3 houses and 2 or 3 cars over the years, and I filled in the inflation calculator, and the houses have gone up more than anything else, much more than food, much more than cars. Yeah, it's tough, but it's always been tough, and it always will be, I think. So yeah, that's a weak part of it. And I think Rod is pretty emotional and kind of empathetic in some ways. And he said he was writing this in the glow of this experience of meeting with these guys. My pastor, who's wise, one of my pastors, they're both wise, but I'm referring to one. And he said, this is obviously, it's too long, and it was written in the glow, the afterglow of this experience. But he said, just read the first sentence of every paragraph, and you'll get the most important parts.
There
So
was
maybe
one point.
that's one
sorry.
approach. That's one approach.
Yeah, there was one point where he was talking about the economic issues, and he was saying, I was struck basically when I was back in DC by how expensive everything was. He's like, over in Hungary, I'm going out to coffee shops and bars, and it's cheap. And I was like, well, okay, let me just Google a couple of things and what's the median income in Hungary, and it's terrible. I mean, it's like in the $20,000 USD range, and Rod, it's been publicly reported the position that he has, the fellowship that he has with the research institute he's a part of there, state supported, is well over $100,000 a year that he's making, and so he's making somewhere in the neighborhood of triple or more the median income of Hungary. Of course, it feels nice and cheap over there, right? It's going to be quite different in a richer country like the U.S. So I think he's a little bit blind in some ways to the differences there, partially just because he likes Hungary for the reason.
This is Tucker in the Moscow supermarket territory. Bill?
Well, I guess at first I want to agree with Mr. Dreyer. I mean, these are real complaints, it seems to me, for 20-year-old young men, and this is a serious issue. And so, and certainly many people do feel very much like they cannot trust institutions because they have shown themselves to be untrustworthy in many cases. So what do we do then? One of the things which comes to mind, I guess, as a second comment here in this bit, he says at one point in the essay, he says, "Let me emphasize here that my interlocutor, this anonymous source, was not cheering for fascism. As our conversation went on, I heard real despair." And he goes on to explain that the cultural conditions holding democracy together are going away, and so on. I don't know that I fully disagree with that. I guess I would suggest, I mean, if we're on the new right and we like to talk about what it means to be manly and so on, build something would be my response. I mean, do the hard work of building something. And it's really the same kind of thing that I might say to folks, during the fires of 2020, who might say, the deck is stacked against me, a different me. But there have been real grievances in some cases, but really, is this the manly way to go about things, or are you actually going to go about the business of building institutions, building schools, contributing to your church, and so on? So that's one of the thoughts I had about this, is that seems a little bit defeatist in some ways.
Yeah, I think well, I don't understand younger people, I guess, but it's normal to think that you've got it bad, and that everyone's against you, and that your parents had it easy. Of course, everyone knows that boomers are the worst. I'm not a boomer. I missed it by a month, I think. So I'm off the hook. It's not me. Yeah, I mean, and I think about the Fifth Commandment from time to time. I think that if your movement is predicated on violating the Fifth Commandment, that's a little suspect, maybe. So let's bring this into the Christian realm. You guys are Christians, and you teach at Christian universities, and you're looking at this a little differently. I'm not going to use the word that Daryl Hart hates so much, worldview, but everyone's got one, kind of like some few other things I can think of. But let's look at a couple of paragraphs here, because I think they're relevant to us, and we're talking about some bad behavior, and this what really seems to be anti-Semitism, and whether it's for the lulz, as they say, or it's deeply held, it doesn't much matter. I don't think if it, the words matter, the way we act matters, um, but it's out there. And Rod says if you think being Christian is some kind of vaccination against anti-Semitism, you're wrong. Even young Christians, especially trad Catholics, and I didn't know this, are neck deep in anti-Semitism. They even use it as a litmus test of who can join their informal social groups. So it's part of the lingo. It's just part of the ethos, he's saying, that some younger people have. So you guys are around younger people. You teach them. I'm not asking you to violate any confidences or say anything about what may be occurring in your family, friend group, or church, or generally on your college campus. But what have you guys run into as among young Christians who are mostly conservative, right wing of some kind or another? What have you run into with this regard? We'll start with you, Bill.
I have run into things like this that would support what Mr. Dreyer is saying here, but he did not do a scientific poll, of course, when he came up with a 30 to 40% who are Fuentes fans, and that's not a scientific poll on my part, but it is something which you'll run across not unusually in the folks that I interact with. So, and there are others. I made a comment that it's not a rational thing to come to some of these conclusions. There are others who I think honestly want some answers to fair questions. What is actually your evidence for this or that view, and so on. And it's good to talk through some of these things with such folks. But in terms of people who are quote unquote neck deep in anti-Semitism, I would say a few, not many.
So it's not just evangelicals, it's not just Protestants, according to him. It's a big thing among young Roman, traditional Roman Catholics, he says. And I think, well, I don't know. At one level, this is surprising, but another, maybe not. We've had there's been a number of Lutherans, young Lutherans, who have been involved with this as well, which is we know Luther. I like to say if your favorite thing about Luther is his late life anti-Semitic statements and crankiness, that's probably not the best thing to focus on with Luther. But I guess you gotta pick your attributes that you like. But I mean, these things do matter, and they could hamper your future prospects for employment or for I don't know. I don't. Can it help you academically to be anti-Semitic and to traffic in some of this stuff? I mean, do you warn young people about this sometimes?
Well, I mean, my own main concern would just be to encourage folks to realize that it's important to pause, and if you have a legitimate question about something which comes up, in a realm of what I would call a conspiracy theory, whether it's this or something else, it's always helpful to just stop what you're doing and give your mind 2 minutes to think about it. Maybe more in particular difficult questions, but just because it sounds like somebody may have been keeping the truth from you does not make that so. And a majority of the time, you'll find an explanation if you by consulting your common sense and seeing if your common sense is right. But um, I mean, my own concern is just really to emphasize that if you're a Christian, the truth matters. Whether that's about explicitly biblical things, or if it's about whether some Americans walked on the moon in 1969, or whatever the favorite conspiracy theory is or something. So um, uh, yeah, I have a lot to say about this, of course, but don't want to. I'll let Philip jump in there.
Well, you mentioned conspiracy theories. Let me throw this in because I don't know if either of you have read any of Paul Preston's books about the Spanish Civil War. He makes a really good case that anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory. It's founded on the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is a totally made up work of fiction. And there were hardly any Jews in Spain. I mean, a few thousand, really. And Franco made them a scapegoat somehow, and funded. There was an anti-Semitic Jewish newspaper. It was out of Geneva or somewhere in Switzerland, and he helped fund that and encouraged it and used it. And really, it was just nasty stuff, but it was just made up. It was not true, and that's a problem. That's a problem. So, Philip, what have you run into in this this sphere?
Yeah, I definitely have run into some younger people, especially younger guys, I think, who run in circles that I would like have some concerns about. But I think just sort of the nature of the beast is that they're not super open about it in their real world lives. It's going to be on their social media and often on like anonymous social media that they'll really sort of give in to it. I mean, there are people that I knew sort of from when I was younger who I've kind of watched go down a path that I find troubling. At least a couple of them are Lutheran, now that you mention it. And so I don't know if that's coincidental or not, but I would say I think, yeah, the number that Rod gives, I think, is maybe overstated. And there have been a bunch of people who've come out since then who, work in DC, have worked in various jobs and have suggested the number is much smaller than he's suggesting, and that those people are more niche or in sort of smaller areas. But the worry that I really have is just that I think the younger men that I am worried about, the sort of circles they hang out in, they get this stuff whether they sort of are seeking it or not, and whether they're fully bought in or not. Again, there's this trickle of like this secret knowledge kind of thing. And so I think for some people the doorway to actual anti-Semitism comes from a reaction against maybe they grew up. So I grew up in a very like dispensationalist Baptist household before I became Presbyterian. And so I think for some people, when you go through a period of like, well, I had this background, I now believe that's like biblically unsound. I think it's theologically suspect to have the sort of theological loyalty to the modern nation state of Israel that the dispensationalists sometimes do, that opens the door for them to things that are, I'm not saying, so people sometimes conflate criticism of the nation state of Israel with anti-Semitism. That's not anti-Semitism, but they'll sometimes conflate those. And they'll say, well, now that this door is open for me to criticize Israel in a way that wasn't before, now all these other things are open to me. Or at least they're hanging out with people who are making those implications and suggestions as well. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that it is a real problem. There's a reason why, for one reason or another, several, Reformed denominations have had to make comments about, race issues, about anti-Semitism. It's not a made up problem. Like, people are running into this in their churches. Young men are getting sucked into these circles. I think, yeah, Rod is probably dramatically overstating it in terms of like the statistical incidence of it. So,
of course, what he claims to be talking about and who he was talking to were like young congressional staffers, people that work with the Republican Party or conservative organizations in D.C., and he just said it's basically the end thing. Now, maybe it's a passing fancy, but it's a strange and dark fancy, I would say, and it is. It mirrors in some ways things on the left, which I think that should usually be a red flag to us.
There's almost like a weird. There's almost like a weird like Gnosticism to it as well, and this like search for Sarah Morris put it in the chat, like an aforementioned like secret knowledge, and Dr. Clark on the Heidel blog had a great piece on this like a couple days ago, and I don't know, I'm not going to pat myself on the back, but it still feels like kind of the new expertise side of like the same coin is everyone's seeking after this thing. Somebody grabs onto something, and then it just kind of spreads right from there.
Yeah. And so I think one of the issues too is that what Rod is describing, I think, is true in the sense that a lot of these young men who are probably working in politics, especially in the conservative movement, are, I would say, just very sick of what they view as purity testing. That like they are averse to anything that looks like what they call cancellation, which cancellation to me is a very particular thing. It means, like Ben Shapiro talked about this the other day in his like takedown of Tucker and Nick Fuentes, where he says cancellation is pushing for somebody to be removed from public spaces, removed from platforms, not being able to give a voice. He's like, that's not what I'm saying. I just think he's dumb, bad, and wrong. But these younger men, I think, are allergic to what smacks of cancellation or purity testing. And so anybody comes along and says, well, that idea seems like kind of anti-Semitic, they're just like, oh, well, I'm just going to kind of ignore you. I'm going to sort of push that out of my mind and say, well, maybe they're worth listening to. And so that can lead some people to adopting those ideas. But I think a lot of the guys who aren't even necessarily close to adopting these ideas, at the very least, are far more tolerant of people who are pushing them. And that has those sort of downstream consequences. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
I
go ahead,
would agree.
Bill.
I'd agree with all of this, and I think people folks who are in churches just should be taught of what the word Israel means. What exactly does that mean for a Christian? And one other avenue to this discussion we haven't touched yet that I think is pretty important is that the the sociological context matters quite a bit, and folks like Tocqueville or Dreyer mentions Hannah Arendt in this essay. Her in particular, thinking about what leads people to be attracted to, I'm calling them conspiracy theories or particularly anti-Semitic views. In many cases, it's the result of a real loss of community. And so, more than people realize day to day, there are a million things we take as quote unquote common sense, but common sense has no meaning if there is no commons. And so people's minds in the absence of real community are opened up to thinking all kinds of things, in part because it actually turns out to be pretty difficult to rationally assess every single proposition we affirm. So, the church being a real community and a moderating force in society seems very, very essential to what a Christian response is to this kind of thing. To actually have community where people are rooted and they actually interact with people, not only online, but people that they live their lives with, family or otherwise. The who am I thinking of? Nisbet it would be another one of the 20th century sociologists who talk about this. That people need meaning, and if they don't get it from real community, from their churches, they will effectively they're attracted to anything which appears to give them meaning. A substitute religion via politics kind of thing. And so, there's a lot of different things going on here, but I guess one final thought, real quick, about Arendt is that she makes a very helpful discussion in The Origins of Totalitarianism regarding the idea that people are attracted to conspiracy theories in part because, well, yes, they're kind of attractive, in this aesthetic way, the Gnostic way that's been discussed, but it's a lot more comforting to have a very clear black and white explanation for why something is hard right now or why something bad happened. And the unattractive, boring explanation might be somebody lied, or it might be there's a bunch of incompetent people in Washington. And so, I mean, you see behind the curtain, I'm responding to Sarah Morse's comment there, you see behind the curtain of politics, it becomes a lot easier not to trust those institutions. But, a very clear explanation for why life is hard is often more attractive, even if it's absurd.
You know, when I was 19, I probably thought I was when I was 15, I loved Ronald Reagan. That's when he was elected in '80. Thought that was going to be the answer to everything. By the time I was 19, I probably thought I was a socialist for about 6 months. But I started working full time when I was about 20 for a newspaper, and contact with the real world made me not a socialist pretty quickly, and because I saw there were all sorts of causes for disorder and poverty and all these social ills. It wasn't simple, and I saw that there were quote good people from all strata of society, and I saw pretty quickly, to Sarah's point, that politicians were not to be trusted or taken all that seriously. I mean, I was in Arkansas, for goodness sake. We had Clinton. We had the whole thing. You know, I've had Democratic kind of the henchman for a Democratic representative who was very powerful just admit to buying black votes. He talked about paying preachers to turn out the votes and hiring vans and that sort of thing. Very crass. So I was never under any illusions about that. And I saw some of it I saw misbehavior and misdeeds and insincerity on both sides. But a lot of people don't have that. And I don't know what you guys think about this, but some of the people that have been politically radicalized since 2020, it's like they'd never thought about politics before. It's like they were stunned. They were shocked that there was gambling going on at Rick's place. And I don't know, I wasn't shocked by any of that. But I should be sympathetic to those who because of they were busy or the relatively easy existence that we have in this country hadn't had to think about it before. So I think there was a shock factor for a lot of people.
In other news, we haven't exactly moved on from the litany of good leaders in the Old Testament. There's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah, I think if you read Chronicles and Kings, just read the Chronicles and Kings books over and over and over again. That's a pretty helpful thing.
It seems like the chat over here is getting pretty exciting. But if I can go back to 1035, Sarah Moore says, so they've decided that anything unpolished, in your face, raw, angry, and edgy must be the opposite of corrupt. Not to be dramatic about this, but that sounds like a quote from Arendt. The way in which young people who are very disillusioned, thinking about anything associated with Weimar, we know for a fact that these people aren't really going to take care of us, and something other than polite society becomes the norm, and becomes anything that's unpolished becomes it has the benefit of the doubt in explaining political phenomena.
So there's a saying that's around Weimar, or I'm sure it was Weimar in German. Weimar problems require Weimar solutions, and that's talking about the economic disaster that was the 1920s in Germany, the dissolution of society, collapse of morals, tradition, all those things in the 20s in Germany. Well, those were the Weimar problems, which we think we have. But we know what the solution that was tried, as what James Lindsay calls the Nazi experiment. We know what Weimar solutions are, and I don't think we want that. I think we want to solve the problems, but we want to learn about the a particular solution we shouldn't indulge in. So, are we in the American Weimar Republic?
Gee, I hope not. That's my I think probably my most complex answer.
You would think the music would be better if we were, right?
Yeah. On the unpolished thing, I think that's a really interesting point, because I was just talking to my students today. We were talking about I was teaching today on political parties and the role that they serve, and sometimes political scientists will talk about the era of strong parties in the past, with parties as kind of like kingmakers, in a sort of like pre-primary world, like this is the person who's going to represent us, and then you have the era supposedly of weak parties, and you really see this exemplified in 2016 in the primary debates on the Republican stage. You've got a dozen different people, half a dozen of which are almost indistinguishable from one another. That just never would have happened in the era of strong parties, but the person who stands out on that stage is the person who is unpolished, uncouth, a little bit ridiculous. And I think that carries on into today, where like we have a vice president now. And so I have friends who work in politics. I have friends who know Vice President Vance and think very highly of him, and I want to believe they're right. But at the very least, in terms of the unpolished thing, he's taken on a persona or a tone in his public-facing stuff on Twitter, especially, that is like he's perfectly willing to just like swear and be bombastic on Twitter, which 20 years ago would be an unheard of thing for Vice President of the United States to be just publicly swearing on. Well, social media wasn't really a thing, but like the equivalent of social media, just be casually throwing out foul language. But that's a thing that he has embraced as, I think, part of this maybe performative, unpolished thing that's going on. That's like this comes across as authentic, as different, as opposite of corrupt, as Sarah said in the chat. So I think that's a really good insight.
So, Bill, you're older. What do you think about the? Well, we talked earlier about the change in this, but it seems that for Christians, we should have some concern for decorum and for. We think life's connected. We can't act one way politically and then act another way with our family, and then another way on Sunday in the church. We can't really petition like that, and we're not saying that it's all the same, but these things matter. I think they affect our souls, and they affect those around us.
Well, yeah, I think that's certainly true. I guess just thinking about it to some extent politically, the norms of society, the cultural, unspoken habits of society are just about as important as anything. I mean, it's very striking to me that, one of the obvious changes, say in the last 30 years or so, is there was a time when the president was embarrassed to have had an affair with an intern, such that he had to lie about it, right? The very fact that this would be something that you make a big effort to cover up is an indication of something. The norms were different in very recent memory.
Yeah, the French were laughing at us then, and they're laughing at us now.
So, yeah.
Right.
I guess could I just add one more thing?
Certainly.
Right. One of the things that we have not brought up here, is if we think about the kinds. I was reminded of it from the references to the vice president, but I think it's necessary to point out that some of the same animosity that was directed in a previous time toward Jewish folks is to some extent directed toward immigrants right now, particularly immigrants of particular hues. And please be aware that I'm very much not an open borders person at all. But I think it's clearly there's a very clear biblical ethic caring for the helpless, or even those who've done wrong, those in prison and so on. So it's occasionally it's something which concerns me. But the whole idea that the vice president would have supported what appears to have been a manufactured idea that Haitian immigrants were consuming pets, I think that's troubling. Just that anyone would from the highest offices in the land go about saying these things. And
it was a meme. It was funny. It was compact. It was pithy. It just worked, and we all laughed at it. I laughed at it, but I never really. I didn't ever know if it was true or not.
Well, yeah, I mean, my understanding would be, well, for starters, my understanding would be that I think in a pinch, I mean, a dog would make a good stew, but
20 million Koreans can't be wrong.
yeah, I mean, so but nevertheless, I mean, my understanding is that there's just a manufactured story, and people ran with it, as part of this general alarm. So the real, besides conspiracy theories, modern quote unquote scientific anti-Semitism, the concern, of course, in the 20th century is that there are people who are sapping the energy of our nation. They're violating the blood of our nation, and this is the kind of thing that uh, I just think would be totally outside of what is at all appropriate for a Christian to say or think about human beings in your country. So uh, I just need to put that out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a quote that came up around the time that story was going around, and I think Vance tried to clarify it a little bit, but I think it gave some insight into his actual tactics here, which is that he was quoted as saying, like, if I have to create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of Americans, I'm going to do it. And he went back and said, like, what I'm doing is, making them focus on an issue. But effectively what he was saying was, yeah, there's this bombastic accusation that they're eating the dogs or eating the cats, whatever. The point is, I want Americans to focus on the harm that's happening to the average American when an influx of mass migration happens. And so he tries to clarify it, but I think it gives some insight there into the tactic, which is like they think this is an issue. They're willing to say and do what they need to focus on it. I mean, I share exactly what you said. Like, I'm not an open borders person. I think, the people who present this as a dichotomy of either we have a nation with borders or we have open borders, I think are trying to rile people up in this way that I think is quite unhelpful. But yeah, so 100% on board with that. I think you've put it well.
Well, you can never go wrong with Machen, and even though Machen may have had some, he may not have been a big fan of desegregation, and I think that was earlier in his life. That was before World War One. I have a theory that he was doing some of that performatively for his mother, who grew up in Macon, Georgia, and watched the Union troops march through, which might affect your view of a few things. I mean, that's one of the things as a Southerner, you develop a certain sympathy for just the views that people have and why they have them, black and white. You can't blame some people for having certain ideas, although you don't act on them, and you don't hurt people, and you don't play respecter of persons, but everyone's related to somebody who's got some views that are challenging, let's say. But Machen was a huge advocate of immigrants and of people who spoke who were non-English speakers. He opposed prohibitions on teaching foreign languages to children. One of the laws he really hated was called the Lusk laws in New York, which would have kind of required licensing of schools. I think private schools, kind of like charter schools almost. And some of those were socialist schools. Some of them were German or Italian or whatever. He was actually an advocate for those groups. And some of that was his views on liberty, but some of it was because he was a Christian, and he just didn't. And he valued the family highly, and thought that people ought to be able to raise their kids, about the way they wanted to. So, Machen's not a bad. He's never a bad person to turn to on these issues of liberty, and even on things like immigration. I think when he talked about the minority, he was not necessarily talking about racial minorities, but people that were just because of the situation they find themselves in, they're outnumbered. And he had a lot of sympathy for those people, and I think we can too as Christians. And I think the Bible generally does, although it's never quite that simple. So, any kind of we're getting near the end. I mean, how do you counsel younger people? I mean, Bill, you said you tell them to, consider the truth, slow down, think about this. Um, is there ever time just to grab them by the collar and shake them, or I mean, and can the church really help? Because we could just say, well, tell them to go to a good church and be around normal people. Um, that'd be nice if that always fixed everything. Of course, it doesn't. I think an actual multi-generational church is probably healthier for people to be around people that, be around someone who's, I guess most of our World War II veterans are dead and gone, but, you've got a guy who flew B-52s over here and a guy that fought in Vietnam and someone who's got totally different life experiences. That might be helpful.
Well, I mean, I would, as you're asking that question, Brad, one of the things that comes to mind is that some of the individuals that I'm thinking about, I've had meal with one of them. But I would think that one of the things that you could do would just be to show your concern for somebody, show your interest in somebody through a more personal connection. And so maybe I'm just thinking maybe that's something that I need to do with some of the folks I'm thinking about. But that's part of it. Um, it might be relevant to point out that the some individuals that I'm aware of, I know, hopped from Charlie Kirk to Nick Fuentes. So, these are, I don't know that it's quite accurate to say, but there are folks who need and want discipleship or an example or something, a connection to wisdom, or, for young men, manliness or something. And, I think that's something folks should think about.
A lot of people are in motion, and I think, to be honest, before Charlie Kirk was shot, I didn't know anything about him. I just thought he was one of dozens of political activists. Didn't know about his Christianity, but if you look carefully, I mean, he was sort of in motion. He was moving from more right-wing politics to more Christian-informed stuff. But I mean, now they're fighting over his body, his legacy with regards to Israel. Was he about to abandon Israel politically, or was I mean, there are a lot of younger people are in motion. So, like you said, Bill, the guy that used to be a Charlie Kirk person, now he's Nick Fuentes. What's he going to be next year? I mean, what there is the progression beyond that is disturbing. It could be despair, nihilism, nothing at all is where some of these people could be headed. I mean, I've noticed as a church officer, somebody comes to the church and they were a Buddhist, and then they were an atheist, and then they were charismatic, and then they were Baptist, and now they're Presbyterian. Well, they're probably going to be Eastern Orthodox next year, and nothing at all 2 years after that. This probably always happened, but with the amount of information we have, with the ability to seemingly imaginarily connect with people all over the country, where we can read anything or listen to anything we want to consume. I think that's the unprecedented thing about our time. Is just the way people are in motion and the sheer number of options, the affiliational options, intellectual options, or just checking out and living in an imaginary world of entertainment. And you mix all those up, and maybe you get Nick Fuentes and friends. I don't know. What do you think, Philip?
Yeah, I like the advice, I think, of the personal connection, and I think you're also communicating something that's really apt, which is the speed with which people run through these ideas. You mentioned earlier, right? You get these guys who it's like, a couple years ago, they didn't know anything. They weren't interested in politics. They have some entry into it, and then they sort of speed run
or
through.
the church. or the church.
Right, yeah, right. They become Christian, and then they just like, go through this process, and obviously, I think that's unhealthy. What you need is like a sort of slow, intentional discipleship, and so that connects to what Bill was saying about that personal connection. I do think too, to something, to that the points we made earlier about Gnosticism and everything else, or the idea of quote unquote doing the reading. I think it would probably be healthy for us actually to sort of embrace that and say, we're not. These things are not hidden away. They're not tucked away. Like all these questions, I'm just asking questions. All these questions these people are asking are completely, to me, disingenuous. Like if they actually had questions, we have, books they could read. We have historians. We have people that we could point them to that could talk about these questions. And so, like, to the extent that people are saying, well, just do the reading. Yeah, 100%. Like, dig into the Reformed tradition. Like, see what people in the past have thought about politics, and then let's have serious conversations about what they said about politics and how it's relevant for today. So I have a friend, he's Lutheran, but the good kind of Lutheran, John Arrett. He's written a lot for a variety of outlets, but he's one of the people that I turn to a lot on like these political theology issues. And he wrote an article for Ad Fontes through Davenant Institute recently, it's probably been a year now, but on this, in general, in the Reformed world, we have people who are interested in doing projects of recovery, of ideas that old people have had. And he was wrestling with, okay, when we're doing recovery in theology, is there a difference between when we're doing theological recovery in especially doctrine of God versus like political and social and economic doctrine? And his argument is yes, like the doctrine of God, or what the Trinity is like, these things, these are supposedly, if we're reading scripture well as Protestants, these are supposed to be perennial, time honored truths. These are inspired, these are permanent. Social and political issues are, by almost necessity, historically contingent. And so his argument is that when we are reading the Reformers, for example, or the people around the Reformers for political, economic, and social doctrines, these things are always going to have to be taken, not with a grain of salt, but like with the idea that this is contextual. And so I don't see anything wrong with sitting these young men down and saying, let's read in the tradition. Let's read these old books. And they might have ideas that to us as moderns feel shocking, and let's talk about them. Let's figure them out. But that doesn't mean, as some of these people suggest, well, this old person said it, and so, obviously it's a consistent truth of the Reformed theological tradition until the post-war era. So, I would just say, trying to remove some of the mystique from some of this stuff would maybe be effective in a way, as long as it's accompanied by that sort of personal and pastoral connection that Bill was just talking about. I think might be one way I would approach it. Yeah.
One of the things I would suggest is actually read the New Testament from time to time. One of the
actually reading the Bible, who knew?
Yeah, and I love covenant theology. I love to sing the Psalms, all that. But there's a certain kind of political Christian these days that has no use for the New Testament. And if you say, well, did Paul ever suggest anything like that being the mission of the church? Read the New Testament. And again, one of my contentions is not that some of the kind of politically and church state wacky people, it's not that they have too much imagination. They don't have enough. They can't look at what Paul and tells us about the church and imagine how it actually applies today. They can't. They can only. What did Paul say about political power and the will to power? We saw Joel Webbin repeating that time and time again. That was his phrase of the day in one of his little presentations. What does the Bible say about power and the lust for it? We could think about that. I mean, that should inform our political theory and the way we behave politically too. There have been a lot of weak people and a lot of ineffectual people, but some kind of Nietzschean alternative is not necessarily, it's not the way to go. So again, I would read the Bible, of course, but I would even read the New Testament because I don't know, and maybe it's because I'm a church officer. It's just critical what the Bible says about how the church is organized, what it's supposed to do, and how you're supposed to behave in it. That's what, outside of the Gospels, that's what the New Testament is about. And if we're interested in the church, but we don't care what the Bible says about it, that's a problem. So, Bill, any closing? Go ahead. Bill, any closing words of wisdom for us, Bill?
Well, I want to second what you just said, and just if I can make an argument from experience for a moment. I think maybe 25 years ago, if I'm someone probably I could call very passionate about returning to a Christian America, and really beyond, more important than any reading or university classes or anything, was my experience of being in a church where someone preached Jesus every week, two days on Sundays. Just as simple as that. I mean, if you're going to a church and the church is effectively distracting you somehow, either through you better try harder, or look out, they're coming to get you in the world kind of stuff, and taking your eyes off the gospel and Jesus, I think that you're not going to fix the problem that we're talking about.
Well, and Machen talked about the church as a refuge for believers, and not that we always stay in the refuge, but that we certainly need it. So church should be different, certainly. And the ordinary means of grace, Bill, is what you're referring to,
Yep.
as the primary food of the Christian and the primary sustenance, and it's what keeps us going, what keeps us literally alive. I've said before, without the church, I don't think I'd be alive right now. Not everyone's had extreme situations like that, but I feel like I have, and I hope we learn to love the church more than we do and understand it. So again, that's why I say read the New Testament. Figure this stuff out. But well, we could obviously talk for 3 more hours, or we've talked for an hour and a half, but we could talk a lot longer. And there'll be something new to talk about in a few months, so maybe we'll do this again. Many things are in motion and changing, and we didn't talk about this, but things are probably going to get crazier and more extreme as the midterms arrive, and if the other side has an unexpected rash of victories, there'll be people tempted to do and say really crazy things. And I would just say to Christians, take a deep breath and think about that. As Reformed Christians, we know who's in control, we know who's sovereign, and we know that He's good. So we have to remember that. So we do want to thank you, Bill and Philip, for joining us. And again, we'll do this again, and we might even we sometimes bring in oddballs into the paint. We'll have to bring Sarah Morris next time, because she drove our conversation, and she would set us all straight, I'm sure. So Resby, set our listeners straight, because you have an admonition often for our friends, and we wouldn't want to omit that unwisely or inadvisedly.
It's true, and now as we move into what I like to call the second half of the show, we'll now include a full breakdown of Australia versus England as the Ashes Test cricket starts tomorrow. So we've got a full five-day test matches. We'll break down every single one after the song. But so stay tuned for that. Make sure you don't just hit pause. But in the meantime, please don't be a nerdman.
Join the ranks of the soldiers of the Lord, and battle with old Satan and his sin. We use prayer as a sword, and we work to please the Lord. You should see the many battles that we win. Satan works on Christians, he's a tempter with a bride, and he wants to
What's wrong with you people?